The next option in the hair material is the Tighten channel. And if we check this on, what the Tighten channel is going to do is it's going to try and look at the curvature that exists in the hair already, and then it is either going to work against that curvature if you enter in a negative value in the percentage, or it's going to try to exaggerate that curvature if you increase the amount in the Tighten field here. Of course, you have a variation, which is going to add or subtract this amount from whatever you have in your Tighten strength. And then you have an amount slider, which will allow you to blend between no effect from the Tighten channel or the full effect. With all of the curves here, we have the strength of the Tighten effect at the root of the hair and the strength at the tip. So to start, let's just go ahead and render the scene. So with that render finished, you can see that all of the hairs, even the straight ones, have started to curl in on themselves. And this really does kind of help out in places like around the edges of the pelt here, where we kind of wanted them to flatten out anyway. So if we take a look at one of the originals here, and then the one with the Tighten applied, you can really see the effect that is happening there. Now if we go to something like the curve and adjust the curve so that this is only really happening at the tips, and then render again, that render completed, you can definitely see how the hairs maintain a lot more of the straight structure that they had. And if we take a look at the original here without the Tighten, and then with just that Tighten at the tip of the hair, you can really see how that is exaggerating the curves that the hair creates. Let's reset this so that it is a linear graph. And we can add a texture in as well. We can just do a gradient for this one. And let's go ahead and shift this over some more and render again. So with this render complete, we have the gradient mapped across the pelt. And in the areas where we have one color for the gradient, there is going to be less Tighten applied. So it's going to be less evident. So we have the normal one, we have Tighten, and then we have Tighten with the gradient. And you can really see how this is changing the effect across the pelt. The next channel that we have in the hair material is the Displace channel. We can check the Displace channel on, and then take a look at the different parameters within the Displace channel. The first option here is the direction. Now, you can set this to world or local, and these two options are going to determine which coordinate system is being referenced when the x-axis, the y-axis, and the z-axis are being adjusted. So in the case of the world coordinate system, when we are making adjustments to the splines here, they're going to control the axis in relation to the world axis. So that will be x is left to right this way, z is front to back, and y is up and down. If this is set to local, rather than using those coordinates all the time, it's going to look at the coordinates of the object itself. So if your object is rotated on its side like this, what you're going to get is the x-axis kind of going up and down. As you can see, that's kind of aligned that way there. And the z-axis would still be back and forth, and the y-axis would now point off this way. Next, there's a checkbox for relative, and what this is going to do is change the unit type that is used for the displace value. By default, or with relative checked, you'll see that you get a percentage here. If you uncheck relative, it's now going to give you an absolute value within the scene space. We'll set this back to relative. The displace amount is going to be how far the guides are pushed according to the spline graph that you set out. The variation is going to be how much difference can occur between each hair in the scene. So if you have a variation of 0, you're not going to see any difference from hair to hair on the amount of displacement that can happen. Next is amount, and this is a global slider for the amount of displacement that happens to your hair. So 0% is no displacement, and 100% is going to be the full effect of the displacement. The next thing we want to do before we actually render is set up the curves. Now if we take a look at the x curve, you'll see that we are given some min and max values. And if we click on a point, you can see that the x value is 0 and the y is negative 100, which means this is going to give us a negative value for the displacement. If we don't want to see any effect from displacement, we have to make sure to set this value to 0. Now since this is going from the root to the tip, we also have to go to the max here and set this to 0 as well. This makes it so essentially there is no displacement on the x-axis. The same thing has to be done for the rest of the axes here. Once we've done that, we can go ahead and render the scene. So with the render completed, you can see that we get pretty much what we would expect. The straight hair is standing straight up. Let's go back into our spline graphs, and we'll start with the x curve. So it's set to direction world, so it's going to align to the world axes. And currently it's set to relative off, so it's giving us an actual value in world space. So what we're going to be telling it here is that the tip should either go in the negative direction on the x, or the positive direction on the x. So we'll go ahead and use the positive direction and then click on render. So with that render completed, you can see that all the hairs kind of start going straight and then they're pulled along the x-axis. If we take this and set it to the negative value and render again, you can see that the hairs are now being pushed along the opposite axis. If we go to the Y channel, we can do the same thing. Now, this is really just going to affect the height of the hair. So the hairs are either going to be scaled up or they will be scaled down. Finally, with the Z curve, it's going to allow you to push the hairs along the Z axis on the positive or negative side. And of course, you are able to add points at any point along the curve here. So with this set to a bell like this, we can go ahead and render again. So with that render completed, you can see a definite wave in the hair along the z-axis. The final thing that we have here is an advanced tab. In the advanced dropdown you have include root, and what this is going to do, if you check it, it's going to allow any displacements that you're doing to the hair to happen to the root as well. So if we go back to the z-curve and we set this to 0, actually let's just get rid of that point completely. We can go from the tip of the hair and set that to 100% displacement. And we'll also do the same for the root. With those set to 100%, we're also going to go to the strength, which is going to control the strength of the displacement along the hair, and we're going to set that to 100%. So the root gets 100% displacement and the tip also gets 100% displacement. Now if you take a look at the results of the render, you can actually see the base of the pelt here. And all of the hairs have been pushed along the z-axis, and they're no longer attached to the surface. If we uncheck include root and render again, even though everything is still moving very much on the z-axis, the first segment of the hair, so the part that actually attaches to the pelt, is still connected, and it's being stretched so that the hairs can actually move. Next we have a link field here where we can insert a texture to control the strength of the displacement over the surface. So we'll start by adding in a gradient, and then in the gradient we're going to set this to 2dV, just so it changes the direction that it's running along this object. And this is all going to be determined by the UV maps that you have set for your object as well. So do make sure that those at least exist before you try using these options. So we'll go back to the hair options here, and then we're going to define what axis we want the hair to move along. I've reset the Z curve here to 0, and we're going to move these on the X curve, so from left to right. And again, the strength is just set to 100 at the root and 100 at the tip, and then the gradient is going to control that across the surface. So let's go ahead and render. With that completed, you can see that where the gradient is black, or where there shouldn't be any displacement, we're not getting any displacement, so the hairs haven't shifted over. But you can see towards the tip here where the displacement effect is in full effect because of this texture, all the hairs have shifted over towards the root. Now we are getting stretching there because we have the the include root checkbox unchecked, so the roots themselves aren't included in the displacement. Now, if we just wanted the tips of the hair to be affected and not the roots so much, we can go back into the strength curve here and set that to 0 at the root. And if we render again, you can see that now all the displacements start with a low displacement towards the root and the higher displacement at the tips, so you get a lot smoother of an effect here. We're going to leave the strength graph exactly like it is here, but we're going to take the texture and clear that. Now we can go back to any of these fields here and set these back to 0 as well. So essentially, we're not going to be having any displacement at all. Next, we're going to go to the direction channel and just add a color shader. If we go into the color shader attributes, you can see that you have the option to change RGB sliders here. Now the best way to think about these are going to be relating them back to the axis handles. So you can look at R as being left to right. G, which is green, is up and down, and B is going to be the z-axis, so back and forth. So that you can have control over both directions, a positive and a negative, the way that the colors are going to be read in the color channel here are going to be using a midpoint of 127 for each of these values. So that's like a 50% gray. If we were to render this, you shouldn't notice any difference. So looking at the render where everything was set to the 127, you can see that the hairs are still moving straight up, so it doesn't look like there is any displacement applied. Now, if we were to take the red channel and increase that beyond 127, we don't get a color that's perfectly red, but we're at least saying that red is going to be the favored color in this operation. So if we render again, you can see that now the hairs are curving to the right, so they're being bent along the x-axis. If we go back to the color channel and subtract red from the color, we get something that's definitely not red at all. But again, because it's favoring the lack of red over the neutral options here, we're going to get a movement in the opposite direction. So if we render, you'll see the result is a movement in the opposite direction along the x-axis. The same thing is going to apply with all the other axes. If we set the red back to 127, so we start from a gray state, we can add blue, and that's going to push the hairs along the positive z-axis, or we could subtract blue, and that's going to push the hair along the negative z-axis. Same thing with the green. If we go to green here, it's going to push those hairs on the positive y-axis, and subtracting green from the color is going to push them on the negative y-axis. Let's go ahead and set this so that we have the hairs being pushed along the z-axis. We're going to go back up to the actual displacement channel now, and we'll take a look at the additive and from tip options. But before we do that, let's just do a quick render to see how things look on the z-axis. So you can see all of the hairs being bent along the z-axis. Let's go back to the advanced drop-down here, and we're going to disable from tip. Now what from tip actually is doing is saying that the segments in this guide, or in this hair, are not allowed to be too far apart from each other, so they have to maintain an even spacing. With from tip turned off, what we're going to get is a displacement that is added from each segment to the next. So this means that the displacements are going to increase in their strength along the actual hair. So let's go ahead and render and see what happens when from tip is turned off. So looking at the rendered image, you can see that without having from tip turned on, the displacement that is occurring because of this textured direction is being allowed to kind of almost run out of control. So each segment is getting a portion of the full distance set in your displacement here. And then that's being added on top for the next displacement and so on. Now, if we disable additive completely, you'll see that from tip becomes grayed out. So it's only something that is there when additive is being used. And really the only time you want to use additive is if you are using a color to control your direction of the hair. So let's go ahead and do a render to see what it looks like without additive. So with additive turned off, all we're getting is a straight displacement here. And it's really not that nice looking. So additive turned on is allowing just a little bit of displacement to be added at each segment, which allows you to get this nice curve. So we have additive on when using a texture to control direction, additive off, and here we have additive turned on, but from tip is turned off.